Well, hello villagers. Today we are making cheese scones. This recipe contains mustard, but you can also cook some bacon and chop it up into little pieces and add that too. Here's the recipe. 175 grams or 6 ounces of self-raising flour. The scoop I'm using is proper Tupperware and came from my grand's house. That's how good Tupperware is. I'm not fond of savoury scones, but having tested these, they're actually quite nice and not very mustardy, although my husband thought they were very mustardy. I think he would have preferred more cheese and some bacon. But this is the recipe from the BeRo cookbook, which I have a newer version of, but my mum taught me how to bake using her old version. So you can add salt and pepper. I didn't. And you need 25 grams of margarine. I inadvertently put nearly 50 grams in, and it didn't really make any difference. So we're going to rub in the margarine with the tips of the fingers. But first, take all your jewellery off. Use a light hand, and when you think you've got it, give your bowl a shake and all the little lumps rise to the top. I like to use the spoon or the spatula to just cut up the bits of butter to start with and coat them in flour just to give it a head start. My auntie makes these, not from this exact recipe, but very close, and she's now famous in the family for her cheese scones. The recipe calls for mustard powder. I have actual made up mustard from a jar, which I think worked equally as well. But at this powdery stage, you might get better results from a mustard powder. So we crumble it all together. It's sometimes a bit of a slow process, but just enjoy the texture and the sensation. It can be quite a mindful exercise, baking, I find. Oh, there we go. We're all done, I think. Are we done? Sort of. You will also need to make sure you've got 75 grams of grated cheese. It can be whatever cheese you like, at least a hard cheese that can be grated. Mine's cheddar. The maturer the cheese, the stronger the taste will be in your scones. Oh, there we go. I think we're finished now. So back on the scales, because we now need to put some more things in. Here's the cheese going in. So this is 75 grams of cheese, which is actually a lot more cheese than you think. I thought, oh, that's probably about it. And that was about 30 grams or something silly. So it felt like quite a lot of cheese going in. This is the stage where you would also add snipped up pieces of cooked bacon if you felt so inclined. Or indeed any other savoury things. Here's the mustard. So I'm putting in 2 teaspoons of mustard. And it disappears. So I kind of figured it wouldn't taste very much. But I guess it must have done, because Nick thought it was quite mustardy. So in the mustard goes 2 teaspoons. This recipe is quite straightforward and has mostly ingredients you probably have at home, maybe with the exception of mustard powder. I generally keep mustard in my house because I use it for a cowboy sausage and beans recipe that we quite like here and we use quite often. My gran used to have mustard powder, I remember, presumably to make it up when you needed it rather than have it pre-made. In goes 1 egg, straight in, no beating about beforehand. Right, that's got rid of that into the compost, and now we mix. It's not going to be quite wet enough to mix into a soft dough on its own, so you will probably need to add a tiny little bit of milk. Yeah, it's a bit too dry and grainy still, isn't it? So the milk situation is very much test it and see. Pour a tiny bit in, mix it. If you need to, put a tiny bit more in until you're happy with it. Because if you put too much in, you can't really go back. You could always put a bit more flour in and hope it dries out a bit. So a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. And then give it a good mix. It's sort of coming together, isn't it? I don't know whether this is going to need a bit more milk. You may wish to forego the spoon and go straight in with your hands at this stage. You will be able to tell whether or not it's enough. Oh, apparently it is. So that's the end of the milk. So the scales can go away. And now we're going to tip it all out onto the worktop, take the watch off. Get rid of any little bits on the worktop that you don't want ending up into the dough. And then we're going to flour the worktop, just to make sure that our dough doesn't stick to the worktop and make a mess. It's still thinking about it, isn't it? There we go. It's sort of a crumbly dough, but once we've started handling it a little bit, it might just come together on its own. So gather it all together and give it a big smush. And then a gentle knead on the work surface. I hope it all comes together in the end. Which, as you can see, it is. And now we're going to roll the dough out. I rolled my dough slightly too thin, I think, because the results were quite flat. So do remember that they will grow a bit in the oven. So you're going to need some sort of cookie cutter or a glass or a cup, a size that you're happy with your scones turning out. You're also going to need a couple of baking sheets or cookie trays and some oil. My baking sheets are fairly new and still in reasonable condition with their silicone coating, so they only need a tiny little bit of oil. And a brush with the pastry brush. There we go. So make sure they get even coatings, and then we're going to roll the dough out and see how many we can make out of it. The recipe claims it makes 8, but obviously that depends on the size of your cookie cutter. Always flour your worktop and your rolling pin. There's nothing worse than trying to roll out your dough and have it stick to your rolling pin. as you can see, that might be a little bit small, but it is the full size of my cookie cutter. So this recipe managed to make 11, and now we're going to go at super speed just to stop you from getting bored. They will grow a little bit, but they didn't actually join up on the baking tray or anything, so they aren't going to grow massively. They'll grow upwards rather than outwards. When you reach the end of what you can manage with one roll out, smush it all back together and go again. And keep going until you've got either no dough left or just the scraggly end bit, and just bake that rather than messing about with it, I find. Right, rearrange the scones on the baking tray a bit. So we managed to get 6 on each of those baking trays. So I've ended up with 13. The Proper's Baker's Dozen. And that's the scraggly end. Good for the taste tester. Except you need to find another baking thing to put it in. Here they are, looking splendid before they go into the oven at approximately 220 degrees centigrade, 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or less if you've got a fan-assisted oven. They go in for 15 minutes and see how beautiful they come out. Even the scraggly one. They look like they've got bacon bits in, don't they? But they don't. It's just the cheese. See? Cheesy bits. And now we find a taste tester. So because they haven't risen very much, normally you would split them open like a normal scone that you would do with jam and cream if it was a not cheesy one. But because these have got no rise to them particularly, I'm just going to put them on a plate, and while they're still warm, put a little bit of butter on and go and find my husband as the taste tester. So yeah, as you can see, they haven't risen very much, so just a tiny little bit of butter on the bottom and sit it on a plate. Good for the savoury king of the house. Here he comes.
Have I got to eat this on camera?
Hot out the oven.
Ooh.
I've buttered it because they're not very thick.
Okay, it smells
so you
good.
Can't split them. So this is cheese and mustard. I haven't put any bacon in.
Okay.
But you could easily put bacon in.
Yeah, you can tell the mustard later. Once you get sort of an after kick.
Oh, okay. Nice. Ratio okay?
Maybe a bit too much mustard.
But you're not very mustardy anyway, are you?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.